Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is Daily Drop number 326. Tonight, we're going to pick up where we left off on the morning update and finish this article from Mother Jones and Leland Nolly. Quick catch up. This is the gentleman who called all of the people in Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book. We did the first part of this article earlier this morning, and now this is going to be the conclusion of where we left off. So let's just jump right back in. Again, this is an article from Mother Jones, and the author is Leland Nolly. The actress. It's a weird feeling. I'm kind of repulsed. Pavar was the first person I spoke to who had actually been close to Epstein. There would be others, and they would speak as freely and searchingly about Epstein as Pavar had, musing about their place in his life, some racked with guilt, some clumsily rushing to his defense. By far, the most eager sharer was an actress who had met Epstein in the early 80s, before he'd gotten super rich, and who had maintained a decades-long close friendship with him as he rose into the ranks of the elite. She asked that we not use her real name. We will be calling her Julie. Julie, huh? I can only imagine who Julie could possibly be. I mean, look, a lot of these people that were involved with Jeffrey Epstein, even if it was just a friendship like this lady, Julie, they didn't want to talk about that friendship. They didn't want to say that things were weird, right? They didn't want anything to do with the chance of Epstein crushing them under their heel. So when you had like these models and these actresses and these girls that were around Epstein, well, he was in complete control, right? Julie's name did not have any particular special notation in the book. She's not famous by any means, and as far as I know, she hasn't ever talked to any other reporter or media outlet. I like talking to you. I don't really want to talk to anyone else, she told me at one point. How old are you? You're like my therapist. And I get it. I've had people open up to me and just pour about situations involving Epstein and otherwise. So I get it. I understand exactly what he's talking about there. And for so long, a lot of these people who were affected by Jeffrey Epstein and his cohorts, they couldn't talk with anybody. They couldn't open up and tell their stories because they were afraid of reprisals. Julie and I would speak multiple times on the phone over the months I worked on this story, sometimes for over an hour, sometimes for just a few minutes. She met Epstein in the 1980s at a dinner with her agent and a group of models at a known model hangout in New York City. Epstein approached the table and asked if any of them would like to go party at his apartment, and some of the women agreed, Julie included. While Epstein played the piano for the small crowd in his place, a friend of hers pulled her aside and told her, "I think he's hitting on you." And again, typical for Jeffrey Epstein, right? A typical move, a typical place for him to try and go and get some girls at a model hangout. What better for Jeffrey Epstein when he can walk in there and talk about how he knows this person, he knows that person. I have access to Victoria's Secret. So of course he's going to have these models enthralled. And then we know exactly what happened after that, don't we? Julie allowed there was some initial mutual attraction and flirtatiousness, but nothing crossed the line, she said. The two were friends and remained friends and nothing more for their entire relationship. Soon after they met, Julie would find herself talking with people like Vera Wang and Andy Warhol at Epstein's dining room table, or flying with Epstein on his private planes to meetings and parties around the world. Vera Wang and Andy Warhol, huh? Doesn't shock me one bit. It does not shock me one bit. We've heard how many times the people that were around him, the people that were spending time with him, and then it's always these people that want to live on top of an ivory tower themselves and cast judgment on the rest of us. I find it galling that these people would continue to conduct themselves when they've been exposed for the absolute disgusting monsters that they are. She'd take a couple of trips to his private island, Little St. James, frequent his properties in New York, New Mexico, and Palm Beach, chill with a few of Bill Clinton's staffers, and meet many of the people in Epstein's inner circle, including Virginia Roberts, his eventual accuser. She was always there in Little St. James, Julie said. Yeah, look, again, the corroboration that we have heard from people who were around on the island and elsewhere when Virginia is alleging that this abuse took place is something that cannot be ignored, right? The only way you could ignore it is if you're looking for a way to try and discredit what these girls are trying to say. But the evidence that we have available to us, the circumstantial evidence and the eyewitness accounts of people who have come out on record now, we're talking about 4 or 5 people. So, again, where are the receipts from the accused? They don't have any, folks, all right? That's why they haven't come forward with them. That's why they're not trying to challenge this in any way. And that's why you see people like Dershowitz lashing out the way he has, because they know their backs are against their backs are against the wall, and there's going to be a lot of information coming out. We see that there's 328,000 documents in discovery already turned over to the defense. So what else is going to come out? Julie was always adamant with me that she never witnessed any sexual abuse during her entire relationship with Epstein, and that while she and everyone else knew that Epstein was into young girls, she never questioned whether any were of legal age. Of course not. Nobody did, right? All of these people hanging out with Epstein thought that he was just such a good-looking dude. Such a, big, buff, swole, good-looking cat, that all these young girls were flocking to him. Come on. Everybody knew. I'm so tired of that excuse. What are we, 719 articles in? How many times are we going to have to hear that excuse? She also repeatedly told me how happy all the girls were to be with Epstein, at least the ones she saw. The girls that complain and say they didn't want to be there or that they weren't happy if someone was unhappy, he had no time for you. His attention span was so short, and he could be really rude, so any girl that was around him had to be up and bubbly, she said. He was always joking around, doing stupid, sexual jokes. If there was some girl walking around, he'd pants her or something, you know what I mean? But it was always in jest. I let him go back then, but, it's a weird feeling. I'm kind of repulsed, but somewhere deep down, I do miss that personality. Oh, how many of these so-called members of polite society are going to say they miss Jeffrey Epstein? And furthermore, what are you, fucking 12? Pantsing people? What, are you kidding me right now? That was the kind of shit you did in the locker room when you were a freshman in high school. A grown-ass billionaire, when girls are walking around his house, he's pantsing them and nobody thinks that's weird? Nobody bats an eye, huh? I'll tell you what, try that on some of my friends and see the result. Watch how quick you catch the 3-piece with the soda on the side from one of these girls. Because I'll tell you what, pantsing somebody? That shit's not going to fly. That's not normal behavior. And for Julie to act like, Miss Julie here to act like it's, no big deal. Well, I'll tell you what, Julie, it's no big deal because you're around a bunch of sick bastards who have normalized this behavior to you. Julie seemed absolutely helpless in the face of the monstrousness of the Epstein saga, and over the hours of calls we had, she would achingly retrace her relationship with him and his circle with me. At times, she was resolute in her condemnation, despairing over the seriousness of his crimes, and at one point telling me she was glad he's dead. Well, she's obviously all over the place with what she's saying. I deep down, I kind of miss that personality, but at another point, I'm glad he's dead. Look, I don't know who this Julie is, but it might want to seek a real therapist as opposed to the author of this article. At other times, even though she was a survivor of sexual assault as well, she would grow irritated and retreat into denial, offering sloppy, desperate defenses of Epstein's actions or doubts about survivors. She read me excerpts from her diary over the phone, shared gossip, and led me to flight logs and photographs to corroborate her story. She wept over how such an influential figure in her life, someone who treated her with kindness, someone who she looked up to, could have done such awful, hideous things, and how terrible it was to look back on their relationship and feel betrayed, and worse still, to miss him. Although she had better insight into his life than perhaps most people on this earth, she too had agonizing, unresolved questions, and parts of Epstein still remain an enigma even to her. Yeah, look, it's a lot of deflecting here, right? A lot of trying to make excuses for his behavior. And there are no excuses for his behavior. I don't care if you're his friend, your mom, his confidant, his uncle, whatever it may be. There is no excuse for Jeffrey Epstein's behavior. I am sorry. We're not talking about a white-collar crime here. And I've said this over and over. You're involved in some sort of Ponzi scheme, you can be forgiven. You're involved in cheating on your wife, you can be forgiven. You're involved in stealing, you can be forgiven. Hell, you start an endless war, you can be forgiven. But if you're involved in abusing children, sex trafficking women, for decades on end, and you catch a plea deal the first time around, the second time around, well, you can't get away with that, my friend. All right? I think a lot about what my role and some girls' roles were different, Julie told me. I think Jeffrey liked to exploit people. If he saw a girl and could corrupt her, he might like that. There are two things that make Julie's story unique. One, unlike many of Epstein's friends, she is not a famous or known person. He had a lot of people around him that weren't famous, right? He liked good-looking girls, right? Attractive young girls, or girls that might have been of an age, but were younger looking. And that was what Jeffrey Epstein liked. No reporter would know about her unless they did what I did and called every single person in the black book. 2, she knew Epstein well, and from a very early point, being a part of what she called a small, core group of friends who remained in his life from before he was before he was the rich and infamous figure the public knows him as today. From up close, Julie says, she watched his personality change as his riches and connections grew. Well, until we know who Julie is, and if we ever do know who Julie is, we don't really know how truthful her story is, right? We don't know how close they really were. So I'm going to leave this as an up in the air one, right? Could be, they could be close, no doubt about it. But again, we have to really question people that are coming forward in this case, right? People that are saying they knew Jeffrey Epstein well, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not saying that she didn't. She most definitely might have. But I'm always a bit skeptical. Throughout the many years of their friendship, she attended several private gatherings where only a small number of Epstein's friends were present, giving her an opportunity to meet and get to know the big players in his life. When Julie first met Epstein, he was wealthy but far from the ultra-rich guy he would become. He was secretive about his work, always, but she believed he was working as a bounty hunter when they met, helping track down embezzlers for corporations and possibly governments. Well, this is certainly a story we have heard, right? So this brings a little credibility to what she's been saying, because that is definitely a story that was going around in circles, that Jeffrey Epstein was a sort of bounty hunter, a sort of forensic accountant for the government and for corporations, and his job was to hunt down money that was either hidden or stolen, etc., etc. So that definitely rings a nice sound of truth to it, right? Because that is definitely something that people in the know who knew him early on have been adamant about. She told me she sat in on a meeting in Paris between Epstein and Leslie Wexner, the founder of L Brands and Victoria's Secret, who says Epstein embezzled at least $46 million from him. Yeah, right. Epstein didn't embezzle shit from him. I don't buy that for a second. All of a sudden, he comes out and says that, right, to try and distance himself a little more, to make it look like him and Epstein had a falling out. But in reality, come on, man, who's believing that shit? This was early in Epstein and Wexner's relationship, not long after the two had been introduced by insurance tycoon Robert Meester. Epstein began working for Wexner in the late 80s, though the nature of that work still isn't entirely clear. Vanity Fair in 2003 said it was related to cleaning up, tightening budgets, and efficiencies. Julie told me Epstein was helping to track down employees who Wexner believed were stealing money from him at L Brand's headquarters. So, okay, look, if Julie was really this well placed and she was sitting in on meetings like this, then the information she has is a treasure trove. And I would hope that she'd speak to the authorities, because she might have some information that they could have missed, or something that could help put the pieces together. So I would hope that they would try and contact her on the down low about this, right? She's not a survivor. She wasn't abused by Epstein. She was somebody in his circle. And obviously, according to this article, she has some information that she can add to the wider story, to the bigger picture. Leslie had said to him, "I have a problem in my company. There's something wrong. Someone is stealing from me. Would you fly out to Ohio?" And, of course, that's like hell for Jeffrey, going to Ohio. "Would you fly to Ohio for several months, going over all my books with a fine-tooth comb, and find out what's going on?" So, we know that Wexner and Epstein were tight, and we know that Epstein was in charge of Wexner's assets, right? He was in charge of pretty much the whole kit and caboodle. So it would make sense that for him to chase the money down, that Wexner would have to give him the keys to the castle, right? So again, definitely rings true here. On the plane to Paris, Epstein prepped Julie for the meeting. It was just going to be the three of them, Epstein, Wexner, and Julie. Julie wasn't attending in any official capacity. She was meeting some friends in Paris, and Epstein invited her to catch a ride with him on Wexner's plane. She recalled a nervous and excited Epstein telling her to be on her best behavior, worried that she might say something that would make him look bad, and emphasizing how important this meeting was. Yeah, of course it was. When you're meeting your handler, it's a big deal, right? When you're meeting one of the people that kicked your blackmail scheme into effect, as in my opinion Wexner was involved in, yeah, of course you're going to be telling some girl that's with you that she better be on her best behavior, right? That this is, you're going to deal with the guy that's basically in control of your life. The one or a handful of people that was in control of what Jeffrey Epstein was up to. So yeah, I could see him definitely telling her that it's an important meeting and that he expects her to be on her best behavior, whatever that might mean. Wexner was this super successful guy who didn't really have any life, and Jeff described him to me as completely socially inept, Julie said. Jeffrey was like, "Look at me now, wow, look at where I am," and it was exciting for him. The meeting, at least to Julie, was nothing momentous. I remember meeting Leslie at the cafe, and all he did was eat peanuts out of the little peanut tray. And I remember, just to try and make him feel comfortable, I ate the peanuts with him. It was so incredibly awkward, said Julie. Leslie was shy, quiet, and the meeting was short and uncomfortable. Few words shared, no food served, the trio sustaining themselves on peanuts alone. I can only imagine what this the author of this article, was saying to themselves listening to this Julie lady ramble about Wexner eating peanuts. I mean, have we delved and fallen into an alternate reality again? Well, I don't even know what this is even about. So this Jeffrey Epstein brought this C-list or D-list actress with him to go meet Leslie Wexner? I mean, really? I never heard anything like this before. So I guess, it was a peanut eating affair and fun was had by all. In all, it was an uneventful evening, but looking back now, one can see why Epstein had been so excited about cozying up to Wexner. Jeffrey told me this guy Wexner was everything in the world, but he doesn't have anyone to share it with. And Jeffrey knew all the girls in the world. That was Epstein's M.O., Julie said. He'd take some rich guy and introduce him to a girl. I spoke with one woman who said she met Epstein at an art fair in Palm Beach. He was direct with her. He came up to me and said, would you like a date with Prince Andrew, she recalled. Yeah, look, we know that Jeffrey Epstein was definitely providing girls for the Joe Exotic of the Windsor family. We know that he was providing girls for all of these rich people, and Leslie Wexner too. We know what Virginia has stated in the past, right? So I would not be shocked if, he was providing other young ladies for Wexner and the rest of these people on top of it. You see, because at the core of it, Jeffrey Epstein, his plan was the blackmail. Let's remember, it was about the blackmail. This trafficking ring, of course, it had to do with his sick proclivities. But the blackmail was the real motivation, why this ring was kicked into effect, and more importantly, folks, why it was protected. In the years following, Epstein began to play a central role in Wexner's life. Jeffrey wasn't just a money manager. He was a personal assistant. If Leslie had a problem with his yacht, he was there, Julie told me. The billionaire handed over huge swathes of his finances to Epstein's control, sold a plane and a mansion to trusts that Epstein controlled, and to the surprise of his friends and colleagues, went so far as to hand Epstein his power of attorney in 1991. So remember, okay, Wexner was around from the jump. In my humble opinion, it was Wexner and Bob Maxwell that got this off the ground financially. Those were the two power players, those were the two golden cash cows, and those were the two people who made everything possible financially and logistically for Jeffrey Epstein to kick this off. People have said it's like we have one brain between two of us. Each has a side, Epstein told Vanity Fair in 2003. Colleagues and friends of Wexner's were shocked at Epstein's hold over Wexner. Julie, however, wasn't that surprised. She recalled Epstein saying to her, "This guy has no life, and I'm going to give him a life." It was that simple. So I don't really know if that was the case or if that was their cover story. Again, remember who we're dealing with here, folks. People that are involved in spycraft, there's always an enigma wrapped inside of the conundrum, right? So was this just their cover story, that Wexner had no life and Epstein was the guy that was going to give him this life of, girls and stuff around him, blah, blah, blah? Or was it something much more sinister, and that was just the cover story? Epstein's relationship with Wexner was transformative, if for no other reason than that he became incredibly rich because of it. Julie says a huge change occurred in Epstein's personality after his relationship with Wexner began to solidify, and particularly after he had started amassing his mysterious fortune. Well, I could see that as well. You become bolder, right? You become a lot more bold when you know you have the Wexners and the Bob Maxwells and the Ehud Baraks of the world behind you and involved in making sure that you're not going to get caught up. So it definitely changes you and transforms you and makes you a bit different. In fact, in her mind, 3 people were responsible for the changes she saw in her friend. There was Wexner. Less directly, there was Bill Clinton, who reportedly connected with Epstein through the Clinton Foundation. We know it was before that. He was coming to the White House even before then. Jeffrey Epstein made trips to the Bill Clinton White House, so it was before the Clinton Foundation that they became friends, okay? Seeing a powerful guy like Clinton get away with what he got away with, said Julie, who never met Clinton, I think it just emboldened him to think he could do whatever he wanted. And above all, there was Ghislaine Maxwell. When he was younger and living in New York, there weren't lots of young girls. I could see it progressing as he got older, more powerful, more money, Julie told me. And the Ghislaine thing, I think, is the key. Well, of course, the girls got younger and he became more brazen and more bold because once Ghislaine came into the picture, well, that was when the intelligence angle really took over. And once the intelligence players got involved, they knew they pretty much had carte blanche. They could do whatever they want, a get-out-of-jail-free card. You're going to get an NDA signed for you. Don't worry. An NPA. Nobody's going to prosecute you. Don't worry about it. This is for the greater good. Go and sate your disgusting fantasies, you sick monster, is basically what his handlers told him. So when Ghislaine showed up, that was when it was a little easier for him to have a cover story, a little easier for these girls to be around because he had Miss Oxford herself there to try and make it seem normal. Maxwell, the daughter of billionaire publishing magnate Robert Maxwell, is often called Epstein's right-hand woman. Epstein's relationship with her was by all accounts tumultuous, toxic, and life-altering for the both of them. Well, again, I don't know about toxic, really. I mean, I guess overall, yes, the relationship was toxic, but I don't go off of the premise that there was any kind of real relationship there. This was a partnership, and a partnership not chosen. It was like an arranged marriage almost, right? They have this man, Jeffrey Epstein, who had worked with the CIA or the government, whoever you might have penciled in there when he was tracking down this money for them. And then you have Bob Maxwell's daughter, Mr. Spy himself, someone who was taught at his knee in the world of spycraft. And you put them together to get the operation running. So yeah, hell yeah. When Maxwell showed up, everything kicked into overdrive. Julie related the dynamics of their relationship to me in the extreme middle school terms. At first, Jeffrey had a crush on Maxwell, but she blew him off and treated him like crap. Shortly after they met, Maxwell's father died after falling off his yacht, as Julie put it. Maxwell was an emotional wreck, and it was here that Epstein went in for the kill, in Julie's words. Nope, sorry, I don't buy that more cover story. More disinformation. Went in for the kill. So Ghislaine Maxwell is a victim, right? That's basically what they want us to believe. And I will not have any of it, folks. I'm sorry. We have read too much. We know too much. She is responsible for what she did. She could have went to the authorities when Epstein was arrested the first time and tried to get immunity then. She didn't. None of them did. Apparently it worked, and even though he would soon become bored and done with her, Epstein continued to take advantage of Maxwell's emotional vulnerability and eventual attachment. According to Julie, the remainder of their relationship was built on resentment, mutual jealousy, and a toxic codependency. Yeah, sorry, Julie, I don't think you know their relationship that well. I'm just going to be honest when I say that here, folks. Like usual, I'm not going to hold back, I'll be honest, and I don't really know if I believe Julie's stories here. Sorry, I just don't know if they ring true when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's relationship. I don't think she would be privy to the behind-the-scenes machinations of their relationship. Sorry. He resented her for rejecting him when she didn't need him, and now that she did, he was going to exploit it. She used him and he used her, and that's where this whole sexual production line came in, Julie told me. She needed to be essential for him. Recruiting girls is how she kept her place. She had value for him. She ran his house. Yeah, close. She did run the house. She did have value. She did recruit girls, but from a leadership position, not from a position of being forced to do it. Maxwell has widely been accused of helping orchestrate Epstein's child sex ring. Dan Kaiser, attorney for one of Epstein's survivors, said that Maxwell was integral in maintaining the sex trafficking ring. She provided important administrative services in terms of the hiring of recruiters and management of those employees, the making of appointments and dates for interactions between Mr. Epstein and underage girls that were providing sexual services to him. She also maintained the ring by intimidating girls by ensuring their silence. Yeah, and she also helped abuse the girls. How about that? We're gonna leave that out, huh? That's not something we're gonna add in? Yeah, let's add that in, why don't we? She abused these girls with Jeffrey Epstein and without him. Sometimes with Sarah Kellen Vickers, according to reports. Maria Farmer, one of Epstein's earliest survivors, said under oath that Maxwell brought in a stream of young teenage girls to Epstein's New York mansion and told The Guardian that Maxwell was key in making me feel safe. I trusted her because she is a woman. She would make us trust her. She would make us really care about her. She was so dangerous. And that is the story, right? Who Ghislaine Maxwell really was. Not saying that Julie didn't know Epstein, not saying that Julie wasn't around, but I think I'm going to have to go with the survivor's account of who Maxwell was when she showed people her real face. Ghislaine controlled the girls. Sarah Ransom, another alleged survivor of Epstein's, told the BBC program Panorama. She would be the one getting all the girls in check. She knew what Jeffrey liked. This was very much a joint effort. Bingo, 100%. All the evidence leads there. Everything leads home to Ghislaine Maxwell having a leadership role here. And she should be treated in that regard. She should be charged as a leader in this ring, and she should have every single RICO charge in the history of man that is applicable dropped right to her feet. Maxwell would also allegedly participate in the abuse. Maria Farmer and Virginia both say that Maxwell sexually abused them. And we have other girls. What about Annie? We've heard from multiple girls that Ghislaine was in on the abuse itself. And if she was abusing these girls, don't you think she was abusing other girls? It's pretty apparent to me that she was abusing a lot of other girls as well. Because of these allegations and others like them, Maxwell was on the move for almost a year after Epstein's mysterious death. She was arrested only recently in New Hampshire and charged with enticing a minor to travel to engage in criminal sexual activity, transporting a minor with the intent to engage in criminal sexual activity, conspiracy to commit both of those offenses, and perjury in connection with a sworn deposition. Again, conspiracy can't be committed by one person. Conspiracy is two or more people engaged in a criminal act. So let's get on with the two or more people, shall we? In the course of my project, I would come to realize the little black book was Maxwell's as much as it was Epstein's. Bingo! Yes, it was. Not even a question in my mind. Dozens of people I spoke to were surprised to hear they were listed in his book, sometimes alongside their parents' or siblings' numbers and home addresses, and just as many claimed they had never once met Epstein. But nearly all of these people did have some kind of relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell. A friend of Maxwell's, who had also seen the book, told me, "This looks like her address book. I know several people in here who've never met him." I would figure about a fourth of the people listed in the Black Book knew only Maxwell. Of course, that was her role. Maxwell was in charge of the whole entire entry into so-called polite society. She was the vehicle. She was the conduit. She was the one that opened the doors. So, of course, it would make sense that she would be Jeffrey Epstein's gatekeeper. Like the president has a chief of staff, the person who says and who makes the decision who's going to see or not see the president, same sort of shit here, folks. And it was Ghislaine Maxwell who acted in that role and in that capacity. Her hand in the creation of this book is clear. There are several massage lists for California, Paris, New Mexico, and Florida, containing dozens of female first names with numbers beside each. Next to some of these names are little notes in parentheses like GM really likes. I spoke to one woman, a body worker, who has a note next to her name in the book that reads, "GM hasn't tried yet." "Oh," she shouted, "that's so fucking creepy." Yeah, imagine your name's in that book and you had no interaction with these people, or, you've never met Jeffrey Epstein, or you're just like a massage therapist and this reporter cold calls you and tells you this stuff. I don't even know. I mean, time to get a new phone number, obviously. Ghislaine was a shark, Julie told me. Anything you read about her that's positive isn't true. She's a scary woman. The picture that Virginia drew of Ghislaine, I completely believe what she wrote, Julie told me. Maxwell was Epstein's ticket into proper high society. Yeah. How long have we been talking about that here? How long have we been talking about the conduits that led to Jeffrey Epstein and this reputation that he had? And all of these people that were involved in it now, well, they're either doing the marathon defense, or some of them, it's getting so close that it's become a full-on sprint, obviously. But these people, these were the ones who built this reputation for Epstein. These were the people who looked the other way. And it was all facilitated by Ghislaine Maxwell, her swag, and her, so-called quote-unquote socialite persona. So yeah, this was much more Maxwell's book than Epstein's. I definitely agree with that, 100%. Jeffrey had money, Ghislaine had status, Julie said. Yeah, there's no doubt, and again, it wasn't a coincidence. It was set up like this by the powers that be, at least in my opinion. From the way I see it, my perspective, it was for sure an arranged marriage, so to speak, business-wise speaking, as far as the operation goes. And yeah, Ghislaine was going to be the person to kick in them doors, and Jeffrey Epstein, he was the money man. Well, they were the ones who set him up with the money, right? Maxwell and Wexner. He was the one that had the money. Ghislaine was the one who had the pizzazz to get those doors knocked in and to get Jeffrey Epstein rubbing elbows with the right people, so in turn, they could get those right people caught up in the operation and build the dossiers on them. Remember, folks, as much as these people like money, the one thing that is more important to them than money is information. It was Maxwell who introduced Epstein to Prince Andrew, eighth in line to the British throne. In an affidavit, Roberts claimed she was forced to have sex with Prince Andrew, aka the Joe Exotic of the Windsor family, multiple times in multiple locations. Roberts was attempting to join a lawsuit against Alan Dershowitz, who succeeded in keeping other plaintiffs off the case. Her affidavit was struck from the record in 2015. Remember, 2015, we were still embroiled with the cover-up. Epstein hadn't been arrested for the second time, and the cover-up was fully active still. Not any longer. It's the doors are getting blown wide open, and with Maxwell being arrested and being left to twist in the wind like this, it signifies that these assets are burned and their handlers have torched all roads that lead back to them, and they have abandoned them to their fate. Included in the affidavit was a 2001 photo of Andrew with his arms around Robert's waist, a smiling Maxwell in the background. Maxwell was indispensable to the world Epstein had built for himself, but eventually, Julie says, he wanted to dispose of her anyway. He was mean to her in the end, and he wanted her gone. He called her brain dead, and he'd be rude to her in front of people, Julie said. It made my skin crawl, and I didn't even like her. Treating anybody like that, that's just not right. Again, in my opinion, all part of the cover story. The non-PC stand-up comic. All he talked to me about was comedy. My wife's going to be pissed I talked to you about this, the self-styled pit bull of comedy told me one day, but look, I've got nothing to hide. This was Bobby Slayton, a stand-up comic who was notorious for his racist and sexist material. He used to call me up and be like, "How do you get on stage with all this Me Too stuff?" Slayton said. Funny story about Bobby Slayton. My dad worked in entertainment for a very long time here in Las Vegas, and he had some pretty high-profile jobs in live entertainment. And one of the people that worked with my dad in a capacity of coming through for some shows is this very Bobby Slayton. So one time when I was a kid, and we're talking a long time ago, I was probably, 19, 20, maybe a little bit older. Anyway, Bobby Slayton calls my parents' house, and it was something about work, obviously, to talk to my dad about the production. And I answer the phone, and he goes, "Hey there, you asshole, put your father on the phone." Mind you, I've never met this guy, never heard from, I didn't even know who the dude was. And that was the way that he called the house looking to talk to my dad. So when this dude talks about how he's like a non-PC, racist kind of, comic kind of dude that is, that toes the line, shall we say, there's no doubt I could affirm that just from that one little conversation when I answered my parents' phone. And according to Bobby Slayton, he was Epstein, whenever he talked to Epstein, it was about comedy, and of course Epstein was talking about the Me Too stuff, right? That was the stuff that pertains to him the most. How do you get by using that kind of comedy shtick these days? And if you're not familiar with Bobby Slayton's comedy, it is pretty rank and raw, to be honest with you. Epstein took a liking to the comedian after seeing him perform at the Palm Beach Improv in the 1990s. The guy was a big fan of mine, and his girlfriend Ghislaine called me for his 50th birthday party. She said he was a big fan and wanted me to come entertain, and there was going to be some big high-profile people there. So I asked, "What does it pay?" And she says, "Well, it doesn't pay anything, but we're going to fly you out and put you up." And I said, "What kind of fucking gig is this?" Slayton mentioned to Maxwell offhandedly that he might bring his wife, to which she answered, "No women." The party fell through, or at least Slayton's invite did, but Epstein kept in contact with the comedian, catching his shows around Palm Beach, Miami, and New York. I could 100% see Jeffrey Epstein enjoying this guy's comedy shtick. It's pretty raw, right? Again, if you're familiar with Bobby Slayton's comedy shtick, it is pretty raw. He was a house comedian here in Las Vegas at several different places. He did a bunch of corporate events, and that's where my dad had worked with him a couple of times at corporate events. So, pretty crazy. Epstein invited Slayton to his mansion in Palm Beach for coffee and to talk about comedy. But when Slayton arrived, Epstein wouldn't let him inside. I gotta tell you, I don't think I'd let Bobby Slayton in my house either, to be honest with you. This guy, all he does is talk shit, talk trash, and bash people in the audience at his shows even. He showed me the pool and the garage, his cars, but didn't let me in, Slayton said. He was never invited to the private island, but he once brought it up in conversation with Epstein, who responded that he didn't invite many people out there. When Slayton proposed he and his wife come out to the island sometime, Epstein responded, no wives. Yeah, well, that's funny. Weird that no wives are allowed out there, huh? Maybe Bobby Slayton, just a lowly comic, his wife isn't allowed out there with him. But if you're Alan Dershowitz, obviously your wife was with you, according to him anyway. According to Jess Staley, his wife was with him. According to all of these people that have been on the island, their wives were with them. Why wasn't Bobby Slayton's wife allowed to go with him? Oh, I know, because he's just a lowly comic. Not important enough to get caught up in Jeffrey Epstein's blackmail ring. Oh, funny enough to, if we throw you a few coins for you to dance for us, clown, but certainly not part of the club. Jeffrey was a giant comedy fan, huge. All he talked to me about was comedy, Slayton said. He was like a little kid talking about it. He loved guys with an edge. He loved Louis Black, Sam Kinison, Bill Hicks. He liked guys with an edge. Epstein's fondness for edginess went well beyond comedy. Julie told me Epstein liked anything controversial or politically incorrect, and anything to do with the brain. If it was something that no one else would say, something controversial, even about anything racial or whatever, he was happy to say it. Well, we know that he was a rather racist guy from what Maria and others have said, how they spoke about minorities and people of color. So we know that he was definitely a racist guy, and he probably tried to hide it by saying, oh, well, I'm just not PC. There's a difference between not being PC and being an outright racist, okay? A very big difference. She liked that about him, but there were times it became a problem in their relationship. I grew up really sheltered, she said, and I was never promiscuous or anything. Once at a dinner with Epstein and a male friend of his, the conversation turned and became incredibly crude. The men were talking about women, and Julie was so upset that she got up from the table and walked out of the restaurant, holding back tears, and flagged a cab to leave. Epstein followed her and climbed into the cab with her. Julie was crying. I felt like Jeffrey was amused by me being naive. It was amusing to him. So Jeffrey Epstein followed her into the cab after making crude comments with a friend in a restaurant? I mean, I don't know, but you would think that Jeffrey Epstein was making crude comments all the time. Julie said a friend of hers dumped Epstein for being racist after a racist remark by him sparked an argument between the two. Again, more corroboration of the things that Maria was telling us. How many times are we going to hear from other people little tidbits like this and put it all together and build the puzzle? It's so clear for you to see, folks. If you have been following the podcast for all 718 articles on this crazy-ass journey, then you definitely see what's going on here. If you're new to the podcast, buckle in, folks. We still got a long journey to undertake. When a model in their social circle began to do nonprofit work in Africa, Epstein and several of his intellectual friends told her, as she phrased it, that Africa is a waste. There's nothing that you can do that's ever going to help. It's a waste of money. Well, Bill Clinton sure loved to go to Africa and act like he cared. All of these people act like they care about Africa, but they don't. It's just a talking point for a lot of these people and a way for their charities to bring in some more dough. In his conversation with Slayton, Epstein was cagey, stopping short of offering his own opinion on things like Me Too. He didn't really get into any of his own opinions. He just asked a lot of questions. He asked the kinds of questions that a young comic would ask in comedy class. Was he funny? No. The sportscaster, he said, okay, you can go now. He asked a lot of questions. He didn't talk much. He was bland, said Susie Schuster, an Emmy-winning sportscaster currently at the NFL Network. Schuster was fresh out of college when she ran into Epstein and Maxwell at a social event in New York. I just thought Ghislaine was so glamorous, Schuster. Glamorous. Schuster working for Andrew Neil, then one of Rupert Murdoch's top lieutenants at what would become Fox News, and according to Schuster, there was a great deal of overlap between Epstein and Neil's social circles. Oh, 100%. Anyone who doesn't think that Rupert Murdoch and his social circle was overlapping with Jeffrey Epstein's doesn't know anything about New York high society. These people, look, it's not that big of a club, all right? People like us, and like Carlin said, we're not invited, obviously, but it's not a very big club at all. So all of these people who have big do-re-mis who run around New York City are all friendly with each other, they're all palling around, and they're all having laughs at our expense. A few days after meeting Epstein, Ghislaine called Schuster and told her that Jeffrey would like to have lunch with her at his townhouse in New York. I thought to myself, like a total jackass, I am so interesting and so smart, he must want to go on a date with me, she said. I was 22. What did I know? Schuster was greeted at the door by the butler, while Epstein descended the large staircase by the entrance, dressed in a sweatshirt and jeans. Well, at least he didn't have his sweatpants on, huh? The cool sweatpants that good old Jeff liked to wear around all over the place. Friggin' moron. Epstein gave Schuster a full tour of the house, including the master bedroom and massage room, the same room where dozens of alleged assaults took place, and he and his staff served them lunch in the large parlor downstairs. Schuster was just about to begin coverage of the 1996 election, but Epstein didn't offer his own views about the election during the conversation, or about anything really. He had a really disarming way of making himself appear brighter than he was, Schuster said, but you knew you weren't sitting with the brightest person in the room. Yeah, that definitely rings true from all the accounts we have heard. We know that this guy wasn't super smart. He wasn't running around with the brain like one of these MIT clowns that he was hanging out with. He was faking the funk, right? He was the odd man out, the guy that was allowed to hang out because he brought all the weed. Right? There's always that guy, right? Nobody really wants to hang out with him, but the dude got all that bomb-ass chronic, so we're going to let him come kick it tonight. And that's these scientists with Epstein. They're like, oh, he has all the girls and all this money. All right, someone call Jeffrey. Let this dude hang out. After an hour and a half, Epstein abruptly ended the conversation. I remember clear as day, Schuster said. He said, okay, you can go now. And he just went down into his garage and in his car, and I just walked out. Okay, well, I don't really know what that adds to the story, but all right. The art student. I remember being so scared that I wouldn't get out. He was supposed to invest in my screenplay, said a woman we'll call Tracy. When working my way through the book, I try to steer clear of any known survivors. But given the large swath of survivors Epstein had accumulated, it was bound to happen that I would eventually find someone who had been assaulted by Epstein. My phone call with Tracy by far was the most difficult of the entire experience. Yep, well, I can only imagine, right? Because I've been there myself, so I get it. And when he's going through all of these phone calls, I bet you he was dreading this point of stumbling upon a survivor of Jeffrey Epstein's. Tracy first met Epstein through a fellow student in a New York City art school in 2001. Tracy told me her friend had been commissioned by Epstein to paint, and she tried to get Tracy to go on a date with Epstein. Tracy had a boyfriend at the time, and she declined. But when her friend told her that Epstein was a philanthropist who funds artists and would fund a screenplay she was working on, Tracy agreed to meet with him in his New York townhouse. I was there on a business meeting. I was dressed for business. I had a boyfriend. The butler answered the door, and down the stairs came Epstein, wearing a white t-shirt and ripped-up jeans. Tracy was taken aback by the size of the staff at the house. People came in with food, she recalled. People were asking me if I wanted a massage. I told them no. She remembered climbing a marble staircase and walking into a huge grand room. Epstein acted like a gentleman for 2 hours, Tracy said. We talked about Dolly, the sheep cloned in 1996 to great fanfare, and the whole cloning thing. And he told me he had a place down in Mexico that he was already working on cloning humans. And very interesting. There, folks, 1996, Zorro Ranch already working on cloning humans. Santa Fe Institute and Los Alamos. Zorro dead smack in the middle of both of them. Again, when is the story, the real story of New Mexico, going to be revealed? We had an interesting talk for about 2 hours, and at the end of the meeting, he groped me. I started crying and wanted to get out, and remember being so scared that I wouldn't get out because there were so many people working there. I really thought I might not get out of there. Epstein tried to hand Tracy a check, ostensibly for the screenplay Tracy had gone there to discuss, but she turned and fled out the door. She called her boyfriend immediately after the incident, and has never told more than a couple of close friends about it since. I don't understand who these boyfriends are, because I know my reaction wouldn't be not to say anything. I'd be showing up over at old boy's house. I'd be waiting for dude to come out of his house, and me and him would have a real long talk about how you conduct yourself during a business meeting, especially with my girlfriend. It is just so bizarre to me that there was none of these guys, so-called guys or people around these girls like Tracy here, who stepped up and went and confronted Epstein. Old boy would have got the business. I don't have one friend, honestly, one person that I'm close to that I consider a friend that wouldn't have pieced Epstein up over this. That big mouth of Jeffrey Epstein's most assuredly would be turning into a black eye. She thought about speaking out when the first round of allegations became public, but she decided not to, out of fear for her safety. I was always afraid, because I knew he was really powerful, and you're going to think it's totally crazy, but I bet you he cloned himself, and whoever killed themselves was a clone. I try not to think about it. I wouldn't put it past that he's out there somewhere. He said he had a lab in Mexico, because the Dolly thing got shut down. And look, who the hell knows at this point? There's really nothing that I just, out of hand, just ignore when it comes to Epstein. We know that he was dealing with some serious people down there in New Mexico when it comes to scientists. Is his DNA on ice? Are they going to clone him like the emperor? Who the hell knows? After the incident, Tracy was inundated by phone calls from a woman asking her to go to dinner with Epstein. Tracy confronted her friend who had recommended the meeting and learned that the painting her friend had been commissioned for were paintings of vaginas. Oh, that's nice. You don't warn your friend, huh? You don't warn your friend that this dude wants you to, commissioned you to paint a bunch of vaginas. Okay, because that's normal behavior. She didn't warn me. She didn't seem surprised. I was kind of mad at her, said Tracy. When I told her what happened, she said, he just likes to watch people shower. He won't touch you. I said, are you crazy? Tracy told me that she reported the incident to the New York Attorney General's office after Epstein's arrest in 2019. Still worried about her name getting out and inviting retribution, she submitted the tip through the office's website. That's interesting because I wonder how many girls, survivors and victims of Epstein have done the same thing, tried to come forward anonymously and have been ignored. The Yogi. I saw the whole thing start to form. Calling people up and asking them about Jeffrey Epstein resulted in a lot of panicked hang-ups, which I was expecting. One day I called up the number listed in the book for a financier named David Mitchell, who identified himself on the phone to me as David Mitchell after I asked for David Mitchell. but when I mentioned Epstein, suddenly he insisted I had the wrong number. The next day I read that Epstein's bond was co-secured by his brother Mark Epstein and a friend identified as David Mitchell. Joe Pagano told me I never met him, and I don't know what you're talking about, despite profiles identifying him as a close friend of Epstein. Yep, unfortunately, this is the case. Anytime I've contacted people in regards to their relationship with Epstein, I've been stonewalled pretty much. Ignored, nobody called back. I'm talking even like, DAs, prosecutors, people like that even. It seems like everybody is on the run from the Epstein fallout, and nobody is willing to step up and do the right thing on their own. So that's why I always talk about them being compelled to do so. Others seem willing to talk, if haltingly, only to turn on their heels later on. One particularly ominous interaction was with Epstein's personal yoga instructor, who met him in '92 and traveled with him and Ghislaine as a personal yoga teacher. For the 15-minute phone call, he somberly beat around the bush, speaking in long, thoughtful pauses and letting his sentences trail off. I met him on his 39th birthday. The last time I saw him was shortly after Clinton left the White House. It was 2001, maybe 2002. I was with him in Palm Beach, Columbus, Ohio, and New York, Santa Fe. I did a lot. It's a long story. It's a complicated story, he told me. It's a long story. Yeah, it's a long story, and we've been waiting for people to talk about it for decades. So, if it's such a long story, you should probably break it all down for us now that you're on the phone here and let us know what occurred, huh? Probably a good idea. I spent a lot of time with Ghislaine. She gave me a lot of insights. My last contact with her was, she used to come out here with Prince Andrew. What was Ghislaine like? Oh God, that's a whole different story. I said he could tell me the full story sometime, and that if he wanted, I would keep his identity under wraps. He said no. A lot of people would figure out in a nanosecond who it was. It was a small little group. I don't imagine many of them are going to talk. Look, I've worked with Rupert Murdoch on the far right and Zach De La Rocha on the far left. I try to keep my mouth shut. My contacts were very broad. Oh, well, I'm sure they were, but that's all fine and well. But if you have some information that can help the investigation, it's time for you to come forward, Mr. Yogi. All right, Mr. Stretchy, Mr. Downward Dog Stretcher guy. Time for you to come forward, and then afterwards, we'll make sure you're paid in a nice tofu reward or something. I mean, really, if you have information, come forward and speak on it. Because if you're compelled to do so and they have to issue a subpoena to get you to talk, you know how much worse that's going to look for you? He went on slowly, in a kind of faraway melancholy. I saw sides of both of them, Epstein and Maxwell, that most people didn't see. I saw the whole thing start to form. By the time I called him for a few days later, he'd had a change of heart. He began shouting at me over the phone about how he planned on suing me, that I was not to print anything we spoke about. Well, okay, so obviously this yogi, Mr. Yogi Yogington, needs to be swooped up and compelled to speak with a subpoena. If he's talking about suing people, please give me a break. As if any of these people want a case to get to discovery. Julie repeatedly told me she never witnessed any kind of darkness, but that looking back, she regrets not picking up on what she now sees as red flags. I wish when he told me he was doing naughty things in Florida, I took it seriously. Yeah, probably would have been a good idea, Julie, if you would have taken it seriously. Epstein's affection for young women was no secret. As Donald Trump put it in New York Magazine in 2002, it is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. Epstein was very aware of his reputation and reveled in the attention it got him. I remember he was dating Shelley Lewis, a.k.a. Chocolate Sauce. She looked like a little, completely undeveloped girl, Julie said. She was definitely legal age, but she looked really prepubescent, physically. He was walking around a popular mall with her and finding it funny that people thought he was her father. If Epstein was at all embarrassed about the nickname given to his Boeing 727, the Lolita Express, he didn't show it. He had the book Lolita around, you know. He had multiple homes and there'd be a Lolita on the table somewhere. He had more than one copy, Julie said. He always thought it was funny. Yeah, real funny. Real funny. And all of the people around him, all the you see in the book, and you don't put two and two together. It's because you didn't want to put two and two together if you didn't. It's because you didn't care, or you were benefiting in some way from Jeffrey Epstein. All of these people that talk about, oh, I didn't know anything, I had no idea. Give me an absolute break, okay? What seems now like obvious signs of trouble had tidy, unquestioned explanations at the time. The young masseuses at Epstein's side, for instance. I knew that Jeffrey needed a lot of massages, so it didn't seem odd, Julie said. I asked why Epstein needed a lot of massages, expecting some answer about a physical ailment. But instead, Julie told me that Epstein had said that his ADD tendencies necessitated frequent massage for him to clear his head. Oh, yeah, massages, huh? Quote-unquote massages, air quotes. We know what he meant by massages. 3 girls a day? Do the math. Much of Epstein's personality that was chalked up to being eccentric by Julie at the time now seems incredibly effed up in retrospect. I used to call him on his birthday, Julie said, and he was always really short on the phone, but sometimes he would sort of snicker and laugh and say, "Oh, I've been so bad." I didn't know what it meant at the time, and he used to be full of crap sometimes and say things to try and make himself look interesting, but now I do. Yeah, look, Jeffrey Epstein was a sick man, and he was brazen about it. He threw it right in everybody's face. The decor, the different items around his house, etc., etc. Epstein called Julie after his sentencing in 2007. He said, "I'm going to jail," and didn't explain why. And afterwards, I started to pay attention to the case. And when he got out, I just thought, this guy hasn't learned anything. She cut ties with him after his sentencing. Well, that's at least one thing Julie did that I agree with here. If you didn't cut ties with Epstein after the sentencing, nobody has any defensible ground to defend here, right? If you were still hanging out with this guy after the sentencing, then you have no excuse, and you have no one to blame but yourself for any negative publicity that comes your way. Julie recalled that Epstein had a habit of telling inappropriate stories about the daughter of one of his girlfriends, a woman Julie knew as well. Okay, so we know that that's Eva Anderson Dubin, right? Right away. Eva Anderson Dubin for sure. And the daughter, the young daughter, something with a C, Celia, Cecily, something like that. Either way, Epstein had a trust in this girl's name even. And he also said he wanted to marry her, this little girl, the daughter of Anderson Dubin and Glenn Dubin. Some of them would be like, you know, sometimes little kids say sexual stuff and it's just innocent. But he'd repeat those stories because he thought they were really funny. And I thought he was a little too interested in that. I remember thinking they weren't that funny. Why would an adult tell this story, said Julie. I just remember being slightly uncomfortable. Not like I thought he was going to be a predator, but just that it was a little inappropriate. Yeah, no, you're a predator if you're regaling about little girls and little 14-year-old girls or whatever it may be. You're probably a predator, okay? Those aren't funny jokes. Jokes about pedophilia. Who's making them kind of jokes? She shared with me an idea of hers that she seemed uncomfortable even to speak out loud. That Epstein's sickness had its roots in his relationship with this particular girlfriend. Eva Anderson Dubin, in my opinion. He loved her, but she was never going to marry him, and it wasn't going to work, Julie said. He loved her more than anyone. She was like family, and then she has this beautiful daughter. The girl, in Julie's estimation, was like a miniature version of her mother. I think that might have been what got his interest in young girls. Well, I don't think that's the case. I think it was long before that we've heard about Montreal and we've heard about his going-ons there, right? But there is no doubt that he had some sort of sick fascination with Glenn Dubin's daughter. Zero doubt in my mind. And to be honest with you, I have no idea how anyone under the sun could let Jeffrey Epstein be around their kid. Julie was only speculating. What she didn't know is that in the back of my copy of the Black Book, there are a couple pages handwritten ostensibly by Rodriguez the butler. Reading it, I get a sense that Rodriguez was compiling an addendum to the book in order to aid law enforcement. On one page titled Important Email Address, Rodriguez lists the personal emails for Epstein and Maxwell, as well as several listings with tags next to them like Witness, Interacted, and Chat Daily with Underage Girls, Important Witness, and Scout for Young Pamelas, whatever that means. Oh, I'll tell you what it means. Young girls, another code word. Another code word. Another name and number is tagged as in-house Citrus Systems programmer, right next to another listing for Ehud Barak's Secret Service personnel. Months after Julie told me about the girlfriend and her daughter, I reread the handwritten page attached to the book and saw the girlfriend's name and phone number near the bottom with a tag next to her entry reading, former model and mother of naked pic. Ay, ay, ay. Look, the relationship with the Dubins and Epstein needs to be focused on. It needs to be blown out of the water. We know about the little girl, the Swedish girl, and we know about Jeffrey Epstein's sick fascination with their daughter. And there's a lot more there, folks. A lot more real disgusting stuff, in my opinion. On one of our last phone calls, Julie broke down. It was late at night, and Julie, who tried to steer away from news about the Epstein case, had just watched the Netflix documentary Jeffrey Epstein, Filthy Rich. The documentary features several in-depth interviews with some of Epstein's survivors, and they each walk through the details of their assault at his hands. The atrocities that Epstein committed and the scope of suffering he exacted on his victims had become real and undeniable. She wept as she recalled diary entries she'd read earlier in the day. He was a monster, and he was a monster. What he did was so sick, you know? And then I read my diary, and I saw how nice he was when I was going through a major family crisis, or a breakup or something, and it hurts to still miss that part of him, Julie said. He was my friend. What? I don't understand how you could feel any compassion or empathy for Jeffrey Epstein. He wasn't even your friend. He was just wearing a mask. You didn't even know who Jeffrey Epstein was. He had a mask on for the world to see, and underneath that mask was his true face. And the survivors, they got to see that true face. The assistant's old hippie mother. He thought she was a really intelligent blonde. Transcript of a phone call with a self-described old hippie whose teenage daughter began working for Epstein in his Palm Beach mansion around 2002, just a few years before Epstein's first arrest. Me. How much time did she spend with Epstein at his place? Old hippie. Quite a bit. Me. So this all must have been difficult for her then. Old hippie. Nah, it's not difficult at all. Why would it be difficult? Tell me why you think it would be difficult. Me. Well, just the proximity alone to something that happened that was so horrific. Old hippie. Well, you know what? I think, laughing, if people take payment and he paid people well, then later they shouldn't complain. I mean, that's, one thing my daughter said one time too. Me? Okay. And did your daughter get paid well too? Old hippie. Yeah, sure. Me? Okay. How did she end up getting that job? Old hippie. Well, she's a gorgeous blonde. Me? Nervous, uncomfortable laughter. Yeah, a couple of Epstein's friends told me that if he ever needed someone for a task or whatever, they would find him a beautiful young blonde to do it. Old hippie. Well, she's beautiful. She's 6 feet tall. She's gorgeous. My daughter is a very strong person. Me. You said she got calls from some reporters and got sick of it. Old hippie. Nah, she only got a few calls, and she had nothing to say. There's nothing negative to say. Me. Do you think she'd be interested in talking to me? Old hippie. I don't think so. I probably already told you more than she would. Here I let her know I'd be interested in hearing her daughter's story. Old hippie. Well, I remember one other thing. When he was going to Africa with Bill Clinton, you remember that? Me. Yeah. Old hippie. Well, Jeffrey wanted her to go. Me. Oh, really? Old hippie. She said no. Me? What'd she say no for? Old hippie. She didn't want to get any shots. Me? Oh, wow. Really dodged the bullet there. Old hippie. It wasn't important to her, but he really wanted her to go because he thought she was really intelligent blonde. Let me ask you something. Do you think he killed himself? Oh, man. The old hippie and the blonde, huh? Look, there's a lot out there for you sleuths, right? For you investigators out there. Plenty of ties to tie together here, folks. The man from ORGY. Months after Epstein's death, I dialed up the last remaining listing in my book, a random number in the UK. It was disconnected. The media had mostly moved on from the case, and I was left to sift through the hours of interviews I'd done over the course of some 2,000 phone calls. Yeah, the media might have moved on, but guess what? Not us. Not people like Jen and Lisa over on their podcast. Not people like Roberta Glass. We certainly haven't moved on. One thing was abundantly clear. Epstein's Black Book does not offer a portrait of a guy with many friends. Yeah, he didn't have friends. I've said this from the beginning. You have to have empathy, and you have to not be an absolute scumbag and to be capable of love to have real friendships, right? I love my friends. I would do anything for my real friends. I don't think Jeffrey Epstein had it in him. The book is a product of a systemic effort to collect human beings. A huge number of the relatively normal professional class people I spoke to were shocked their number was in the book at all. Either they said they had never met him or that they had a single superficial interaction with him. It's as if Epstein had tried to reverse the usual dynamics of fame and power. He seemed to know more people than knew him. If Epstein had a talent, it was for knowing how much of his interest he needed to parcel out in order for people, scientists, stand-up comics, aspiring models, to feel flattered by his attention. Well, I think in some cases that might be true, right? But really, a lot of these people, it was about the money and the prestige, not about flattery. There were plenty of clues that Epstein was a poser. Ask around the finance world and you'll be hard-pressed to find anybody who actually traded with the supposed billionaire investment broker. Ask the scientists in his orbit and they'll tell you, as Stuart Pavar told me, that he didn't know shit from Shinola about science. Steven Pinker, trying to distance himself from Epstein, told New York Magazine, despite what various friends and colleagues all said what a genius he was, I found him tedious and distasteful. A kibitzer more than a serious intellectual. Yeah, you sure took his money though, didn't you, Pinker? You sure hung out with him, didn't you, though, Pinker? And then you went and blocked anyone on Twitter who mentioned your name along with Jeffrey Epstein, didn't you, Pinker? Ask the art people in his life and they'll tell you about the fakes and forgeries. He was amused to put one over on the world by having fake art, Pavar told me. He thought that he was seeing through the fallacy. And yet Epstein's reputation for genius persists. Most of what I heard Epstein's peers adduce to his brilliance amounted to no more than half-baked contrarianism. He wasn't afraid to stir things up, or boilerplate TED Talk drivel. Jeffrey was a big fan of transhumanism. When I pressed people to tell me about the guy, about what he thought about the world, they rarely had an answer. Yeah, he was living a different life, okay? What they saw and what Jeffrey Epstein really was were two very different things. Jeffrey Epstein was your quintessential asset. This man took his job serious, and he definitely played the game. When I pressed people to tell me about the guy, about what he thought about the world, they rarely had an answer. I was repeatedly told that he never really got into what he thought about whatever particular subject was being discussed, and that he had a knack for making himself seem smarter and more interesting than he really was. Well, you know what they always say, right? Keep your mouth shut and nobody will tell you you're stupid. Open it up and, well, quite easy to find out. Every time I did manage to drill down into something concrete, some actual idea or thought of his, it was a mixture of psychotic Silicon Valley drivel and freshman year bongwater philosophy delivered to me with total reverence. You have to write this in your story. This is something I learned from Jeffrey. This was his line, Julie told me. People make mistakes because they don't think about what they can lose, only what they can gain. This is what I took from him. Yeah, Jeffrey Epstein really was just a world-class advice giver, huh? The kind of guy that you really want to sit down with and get some life advice. I mean, just bring in chocolate sauce for the win here. We'll have chocolate sauce come in. We'll have Jeffrey Epstein give us life advice, and everybody will just have just a fantastic time. After Epstein's arrest in 2019, a media narrative coalesced around the question of his strange place in the global elite. Epstein, the master salesman, a man who had skillfully conned his way into the world's most powerful circles, fooling everyone in the process. But after my travels through the book, after hearing more of the petty gossip and childish drama of the people who rule our world, I realized that was obviously incorrect. Built into the premise of Epstein, the mastermind scammer, is the notion that some kind of legitimate path to a legitimate global aristocracy exists. To call Epstein a grifter is to assume he circumvented some genuine meritocratic world order where the real virtuosos dutifully climb the real ranks into the oligarchs powered by nothing but their native talents. Yeah, that's not the case at all. These people, it's a world of nepotism, a world of trade-offs, and a world of selling one's soul and selling who you are. These people end up in these positions of power, elected or otherwise, and they are completely and utterly turned into something that is not even recognizable as a human. The truth is that the elite world that Epstein ascended into, the one I tapped into by way of the Black Book, is populated with hordes of loathsome, boring, untalented people living their bumbling, idiotic lives while just so happening to wield some share of the preposterous global bounty that he and the rest were after. That is a perfect paragraph for these people. So-called polite society being put on blast by the author. I like it, because guess what? These people are sick. They are very sick, folks, and they think they're better than us, but they are not. And the time for them having us under their thumb is slowly coming to an end. For all the mystery surrounding Epstein's fortune, its existence is hardly more inscrutable than the wealth of any of his other billionaire peers. He earned it the same way they all did, which is to say precisely, not at all. Yeah, look, the money laundering factor swings right into this, right? It goes right into the undercurrent of the major conversation we're having. And the FinCEN files play right into this. If it wasn't for the way they manipulate those money markets, do you really think that these people would be able to operate the way they were able to operate? This wasn't some masterful hack into global aristocracy. It's what everyone does. It's what the whole thing is. There is no scam here. It's grifters grifting grifters all the way down. And that is the case, there's no doubt, but there's real-life consequences for those of us at the bottom here. While these people are grifting and grifting and grifting from the other grifters, we're the ones that are really paying the price with our fortune, our freedoms, and our futures. In a way, it's easy to understand the impulse of Epstein's network to make him into something more than he was. The self-flattering idea that there was some ineffable substance to him, some bright light within, that explains the ease with which he accrued social and temporal power has a match in much of the conspiracizing about the scandal and his death. The difference is the conspiracy theories actually seem plausible. I'm the farthest thing from a conspiracy theorist. I rely on Occam's razor for most things in my life. But when it comes to this case, folks, I think we've left conspiracy theory a long time ago, and we are embroiled in the world's largest cover-up. But maybe this is simply a product of my own Epstein-addled brain. It's impossible to tell. I've now spent more than a year falling down a series of rabbit holes, plus thus far withstanding permanent psychic damage. Look, I understand that completely. This is such a heavy topic. And this is a detailed article, so I know that this journalist is not talking out of his ass. This is somebody who spent time on the case, somebody who has made these phone calls, and really dedicated a part of themselves to it. And I totally understand that. We're over a year straight here talking about this case every single day. How many times do I tell you I feel like I have to take a bleach bath? So I totally understand what this guy's talking about. I can report that the current grand unified theory of Jeffrey Epstein goes like this. He was indeed operating a child sex ring. Check. He was videotaping members of the global elite engaged in sex acts with underage girls on his private island. Check. And he was using his footage to blackmail them, either for his own personal enrichment or on behalf of any number of intelligence agencies. Check, check, check. The Epstein as intelligence angle posits either that he was conducting the sex trafficking at the government's request or that he was already doing the trafficking when the governments took notice and started using him as an asset. I think it's a little bit of both. Okay? I think it's a little bit of both. They knew that he had proclivities and he was on their radar, but he wasn't engaged in a huge monstrous operation like this. Then, well, once the intelligence really got involved and the jerk-offs from the CIA showed up, well, it became what we seen. The theory neatly justifies both his untraceable wealth and outlandish special treatment in the criminal justice system, and there is some compelling evidence to go along with it. When prosecutors raided his home in 2019, a safe was found containing multiple CDs with the label Young Name Plus Name. Also found was a fake Austrian passport containing his photograph and a spoofed name that listed his residence as Saudi Arabia. This safe also contained 48 loose diamonds and $70,000 in cash. In August 2019, citing a friend of Ghislaine Maxwell, Vanity Fair reported that Epstein and Maxwell had the island home completely wired for video and that they were videotaping their guests as a form of blackmail. We've heard this from a lot of the survivors, right? And not only the survivors, we've heard it from IT specialists like Steve Scully. Both Virginia Roberts and another Epstein accuser, Shantae Davies, make similar allegations. When I mentioned the video surveillance to Julie, she said, "Oh yeah, there's a security room with a bunch of TVs. Jeffrey introduced me to the guy who watched them." The guy who watched them, huh? That would be an interesting conversation. I wonder who was in charge of monitoring those TVs. But the most damning evidence of Epstein's conspiracy is the absurd plea deal offered by U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta in 2007 after investigators had identified dozens of underage girls who'd been sexually abused by Epstein. Acosta granted federal immunity to any potential co-conspirators of Epstein's, an absolutely unheard of provision, particularly in the case of an alleged serial child molester. And let's take a minute here to remember that it was not just Acosta, okay? Acosta is the guy who is catching all of the flack here. But in reality, do you think a decision was like this was just made by Acosta? Of course it wasn't. It was signed off on by Mukasey and other people. So while Acosta should have never been part of the Trump administration, should have been fired, I'm okay with all of that. We can't just lay all the blame at his feet. He has bosses too, and we know how this works. Also within the plea deal was another unheard of provision stating this agreement will not be made part of any public record. A cover-up that was found to be illegal until an appeals court reversed it on a technicality. A technicality, right? Do you remember? Why do you think I'm always so going so crazy about technicalities? That's the only way these people get off. It's not because they're innocent ever. It's not because they bring evidence to prove their innocence. It's because they use technicalities. That's how they get off. Calling this a sweetheart deal doesn't even come close to capturing it. The feds never introduced a 53-page indictment they had prepared, and even though nearly 30 victims were interviewed, Epstein only ended up being charged only with the procurement of an underage girl for prostitution. An underage girl cannot be a prostitute. That law is so ridiculous. The feds dropped their case, and Epstein ended up serving 13 months in a private wing of a Palm Beach County jail, where he was chauffeured to and from a luxury office space for 12 hours a day, and allowed to receive female visitors. The worst part is that this cover-up essentially worked for over a decade. That is the most galling part of it, right? The most enraging part of all of this is how long it occurred. Alfredo Rodriguez, the butler who attempted to sell the Black Book, served more jail time than Epstein ever did for serially molesting underage girls. I said that last night. It's absurd. It is absolutely absurd. New York brought new charges against Epstein, arresting him in an airport in July 2019. In an effort to find out more about the infamous plea deal, I spoke to several members of Epstein's 2007 defense team, including Alan Dershowitz, who told me the plea was put in place to protect the women, which is very clearly horrendous bullshit that makes no sense whatsoever. Look, I could have told you there, buddy, if you think you're going to get anything from Alan Dershowitz that's more than just garbage, you're really asking for too much. The guy was and is an obvious scuzzball. Spencer Cooven, who represented some of Epstein's survivors, flat out accused the DOJ of attempting to protect people like Ghislaine Maxwell with the co-conspirator provision. My efforts, and those of many other reporters, have to this day failed to uncover a single shred of even a passable answer as to why Epstein was offered a plea deal that was so good it was illegal. That's it in a nutshell. All of you out there that like to, run mouths and shit on like Twitter about how there's no evidence or where do you get that from? I honestly don't understand. There is so much evidence here that this was so much larger than what anyone ever thought. The fingerprints of intelligence are everywhere on this. In 2019, journalist Vicky Ward reported that Acosta, then in charge of Trump's Labor Department, had told the president's transition team that he cut the deal with Epstein's lawyers after he had been told to back off. According to Ward, he had explained himself to Trump's team by saying, "I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone." The rumors of Epstein the spook are not new. In 1992, in the first ever public profile of Epstein, Mail on Sunday reported that little is known of Mr. Epstein. One outrageous story links him to the CIA and Mossad. The most intriguing rumor is that he was a corporate spy hired by big businesses to uncover money that had been embezzled. They have them all over the place. You don't think that there are CIA agents embedded in corporations? You don't think that there are CIA agents at all of your favorite news outlets? There are. Just take a look for how many former CIA agents ran for office in 2016. Folks, they are everywhere. Unelected bureaucrats that literally have the power of life and death over us. When I asked Gloria Allred, who is now representing several of Epstein's survivors, about the inscrutable plea deal, she told me, there is no good answer. It doesn't exist, and that's why you can't find it. Sometimes not finding the answer is the answer. The dark carnival that is Epstein's case ended with a mysterious death while awaiting trial in the Metropolitan Correctional Facility in August of last year. According to New York City Medical Examiner, Epstein hanged himself with his bedsheet either on the night of August 9th or early in the morning of August 10th, which, if true, would make his death the first acknowledged suicide in 14 years at the institution. How many times have I brought that up as well? Sometimes things are what they are. The cause of his death and the circumstances around it are widely contested. Around half of Americans believe he was murdered. You can count me in with that half, and you can count in just about everybody listening to this program as well. It doesn't add up. The facts that they brought to the table do not add up, folks. A medical examiner hired by Epstein's brother ruled the death a homicide by strangulation, citing Epstein's broken hyoid bone, a small U-shaped bone just above the Adam's apple that rarely fractures in instances other than violent strangulation. The wounds on Epstein's neck, which drew blood, were not under the mandibles, as is usual with hanging victims, but instead around the middle of the neck, which is consistent with strangulation. And there was no real investigation into this. They didn't take pictures of the body at the scene of the crime. They didn't take pictures of the scene of the crime. The video went missing. They put him in there with Tartaglione as his cellmate. None of it makes sense. The wound was also thin and wire-like, much thinner than a bedsheet, and photos of Epstein's cell show the bedsheet itself was not bloody. While this is certainly a curious set of circumstances, none is a smoking gun in and of itself. But there are more, even stranger details around what Attorney General William Barr described as a perfect storm of screw-ups. Epstein had been placed into a special housing unit after an earlier suicide attempt and was to have a cellmate and wellness check every 30 minutes. 2 protocols that were not followed on the night of his death. Well, I don't think he should have had a cellmate. Certainly not Tartaglione, a guy that was in there for killing people. The 2 guards were charged with falling asleep at the desk and later falsifying the necessary records. The 3 cameras with views of his cell simultaneously malfunctioned. 2 had died, and 1 had produced footage that was deemed unusable. How in the hell can you explain that? That's a coincidence? Everything just died at once, huh? Okay, yeah, I'm going to believe that. Almost everyone I spoke to expressed either doubt or total disbelief that his death was a suicide. Only one person, Alan Dershowitz, believed outright that he had killed himself. Yeah, Dershowitz doesn't want this to go on any longer, right? The worst thing for Dirty Dersh, Mr. I kept my underpants on, is for this case to keep growing and for more information to come out, because we all know that Dirty Dersh himself is caught up to his disgusting wrinkled ears. A woman who didn't know Epstein well but was close to members of his inner social circle told me, "It smells to me, I'm not going to give you any names, but there's definitely people closer to this story that don't think he killed himself." Nobody does. Nobody who's close to this story thinks he killed himself. Nobody. Not Doug Schoen either. It was Epstein's inexplicable death that ushered in a frenzy of conspiracy theories. Everywhere you looked in Epstein's life were nauseating sets of compounding coincidences, and it seemed that every bizarre detail unearthed led to 10 or 20 more. That's for sure. I mean, I can't tell you how many details of this case I would unearth or come into contact with, and then it would lead to just even more questions. Every time we think we have an answer, it really is just leading us to more questions. Building off Epstein's enigmatic reputation and the reports then coming out about his freakish scientific pursuits, some of the conspiracizing became fevered, grandiose, even occultish, with Epstein depicting as a high-ranking official for some secret world order. Well, I don't believe any of that nonsense at all. I think that he was what he was. He was an important asset, right? But a mid-level employee in the grand scheme of things when it comes to intelligence. This urge to make Epstein's power sophisticated and complex serves a similar purpose as the elite's insistence on Epstein's extraordinary genius. Both are ways of squaring the evident smallness of the man himself with the vastness of the world he built and the seemingly outsized influence he possessed. Both of them betray a collective lack of imagination when it comes to just how ludicrously rewarded dumbasses can be in this country. And not only this country, all over the world, because, let's face it, folks, have you looked at social media lately? It is full of just complete and utter jackasses, and these are the people that we're sharing air with on a regular basis. Epstein didn't have to be anything special to become a key player in an evil conspiracy. He had to be rich, and he had to be useful to people richer and more powerful than he was. The very real possibility is that Epstein was both a rich dumbass and a key player in an evil conspiracy, because evil conspiracies require nothing more. During one of our last conversations, Julie mentioned, in throwaway fashion, a diary entry she had stumbled upon about a book recommendation from Epstein. Summarizing for me, she explained that she'd asked Epstein why he had so many girls around. I asked him why he was like this, she recalled, and he said to me to read some book. He told me it influenced him to become wealthy. The book was The Man from Orgy, O-R-G-Y, an obscure 1965 James Bond ripoff written by Theodore Mark Gottfried under the pen name of Ted Mark. It's about a con man who travels the world under the guise of being a sex researcher in order to spy for the U.S. government. The novel begins with the protagonist Steve Victor in Damascus for the kickoff of an extensive survey of an Arab and Oriental sex practice. There he is approached by a U.S. diplomat and invited to the embassy. In short order, Victor is recruited to spy for the U.S. government. Look, I know it sounds weird, but a lot of times that's how it happens. They're approached, and then they become assets. The CIA works like this, folks. It is disgusting that the United States government pays for this sort of shit. This research program you're engaged on, Mr. Victor, gives you entry to places the United States government could never officially investigate. The key to a factor which might prove quite vital in our handling of international power politics lies in one of these places. The novel is an unbearable horror show. It's violent and grotesquely pornographic, containing toddler brothels and graphic details of children and infants being ceremonially raped and trained into sex slavery. Jesus Christ. So this is the kind of book this guy's telling you to read there, huh? And when he recommended this book to you, that wasn't sign enough to get out of there and never be around this dude ever again? I mean, holy shit. The protagonist gets custody of such a slave from the U.S. Embassy. His fake research organization, ORGY, stands for Organizations for the Rational Guidance of Youth. The girl tells him about being penetrated multiple times a day since age 3 as training for a life of sex slavery, as well as the brutal beatings that were part of her training. She tells him that girls enjoy being raped. Victor gawks at and participates in the sexual mayhem, all the while using his cover as a sex researcher to spy on Syrian sheikhs, steal Soviet launch codes, and eventually bring the downfall of Nikita Khrushchev. What do I always tell you? The means justify the ends to these people. And if you don't think that there are people like this Victor from this book out there, you're wrong, folks. Jeffrey Epstein was one of them. We saw it right here in front of our own eyes. It played out in front of our own eyes. Julie didn't know what the book was about, but she remembered the conversation well. It was one of the last things we talked about. He said to me, "Read this book, and that will help you understand," Julie told me. I never read it, and I don't think I ever will. Yeah, well, I don't think that I will ever be reading it either, folks. So there you have it. The second part of our 2-part series of the phone calls with everybody in Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book. And I think that a lot of these people who were in this Black Book, who had relationships with Jeffrey Epstein, are starting to understand that there are no rocks to hide under anymore. That it's time to come forward and talk about what you know. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All right, everybody, I will be back tomorrow morning, and we will pick it back up. I hope you all have an incredible Sunday night.